What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video from Pink Tourmaline. Not just any video. Today we are doing an amazing interview. This is Mike Martin from My Dark Explorations. This is somebody that so many people on my live streams have said, you got to interview this gentleman and get his take and get his thoughts and the entire framework of reality. And he responded right away, got back to me right away when I reached out, and he is eager to get on here. I've listened to a bunch of his interviews, and he said that's what he wants to do. He wants to get out there and he wants to share this information because he's found through his writings and through his YouTube channel that people are interested in this content, as I found as well. Why shouldn't we be? It's the most important information on the planet because it has to do with exactly why we're here. So many people don't even get to that question. Now, I don't want to talk too much, but I do want to read a quick introduction, a quick bio. If you guys are new to Mike Martin, you got to check him out at his YouTube channel. But let me read this quick intro, and then Mike, we're going to get into it. You're going to be the one that's talking, not me. Mike Martin is the creator of My Dark Explorations, where he documents more than 3 decades of personal experiences with out-of-body states, astral travel, lucid dreaming, and what he describes as interdimensional portals. Mike says his explorations began with an interest in OBEs, by the way, that began with Monroe, okay, really cool, but evolved into hundreds of encounters with unusual non-physical environments, intelligences, and realities that led him to question conventional ideas about the afterlife and the nature of our world. I say all the time on this channel, this is about the nature of reality. Rather than asking people to accept his conclusions, he emphasizes direct experience and personal investigation, often warning that the astral realms and the beings encountered within them may be far more complicated and deceptive than traditional spiritual teachings suggest. He's also the author of My Dark Explorations and My Dark Explorations Portals. Now, if you're familiar with this channel, we are all very skeptical. So this isn't a massive deviation from so many of the things that we talk about. I think for many people, this idea that there are deceptive entities in the astral and beyond is totally foreign. So if you're one of these new people, buckle up. We're about to get into it, and we're about to start talking about the nature of reality. So without further ado, Mike Martin, thank you so much. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Well, it's great to have you.
Skepticism is very important, especially in this whole spiritual, I guess, genre is what you would call it. So, but when I first started, I wasn't really like that. I wasn't real skeptical. I kind of believed because I didn't have any experience in it. When people don't have any experiences or have limited experiences, they tend to want to gravitate towards, what the majority are believing or what the majority are accepting. So, and that's why a lot of people just go that way because they don't have anything to base their findings on or information. They have to accept some form of belief to begin with and then build upon that. But the problem is if you have a weak foundation to begin with, as soon as you start to build up all those levels, then it doesn't really stand on its own anymore.
Now, does that say something positive about humans or our essence or our consciousness that we are, you could say, gullible? Maybe it's also a combination of how much manipulation, deception there is here, but that we want to believe, we want to trust people. So does that say something positive about us at our true essence, that we maybe seem to be easy to manipulate to some extent?
Well, I think it's got to do with the way we've been programmed throughout life, but also you want to believe that what surrounds us has some type of we could put our trust in it because we understand a lot of times when we see what happens in our world, and then therefore we look to what we would say is the spiritual world as more trusting, and we would think it would be that way. So therefore, when we experience something in the non-physical, once we finally attain, that level of access, then we always want to just kind of like, okay, I'm going to trust this because this is coming from an outer worldly source. So why shouldn't I trust it? Everybody says, oh yeah, there's this spiritual helpers and angels and all this type of thing. Why wouldn't I trust it? And we want to, we want to believe everything is good, even though we see a lot around this world is not, but we still also have this faith that everything is going to be good at its base. And that's why we always kind of just go along with it. And until something comes up that is really, a stark difference between what we believed and what we're experiencing. And then, even though you experience something that you don't believe is true, a lot of times people will just overwrite that experience and still go along with their programming because that is more comfortable. We want to be complacent and comfortable in an area, and therefore, we accept a lot of those things, even though we don't believe, even though we experience other than, we still want to accept it because that's what we want, is goodness.
It's difficult. I've gone through that path myself in terms of believing the NDEs were the end all be all, that everything was relayed was true. And it's painful to start to acknowledge or accept that, wait a minute, there's deception in these beautiful accounts. There's untruths in beyond the real world, because somehow I think subconsciously or consciously it gets programmed into us in various ways that once we exit, it's truth. The deception is over. The games end once we leave this physical plane. And to now open your mind up to this idea that that's not how it is, it's scary. It sucks. I was talking to Betty Guadagno. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, but she's somebody in the NDE space that she had a very vivid NDE, like so many other people that have had these really powerful NDEs that have been documented, where she was overwhelmed with this immense feeling of love. She saw her father, who had been deceased, I think 11 or 13 years prior to this experience. And I asked her too, when I interviewed her on my channel, did you ever think that this is maybe a deception or a projection in any way? Just asking. I wasn't trying to convince her, of course, but just curious. And she said, no, of course not. Why would it be fake? Why would it be a deception? And I think too, it's if you actually experience one of these instances, that must be even harder to go back and look at it with a critical eye, because you want to believe all that stuff so much. Isn't that right?
Right. I mean, if you experience an angelic looking creature and you feel this feeling of love and emotional, empowerment, and you feel all this energy, immediately you're going to obviously think, this is good. This is what good feels like. This is, and if you're going to manipulate somebody, the first thing you always want to do is get them to trust you in any way, shape, or form. Once you have their trust, at some point you can even punish them, and they'll still keep coming back for more because they believe that they have this connection with you. And therefore, you can manipulate people, and it happens all the time in regular physical life. And where do we all think this comes from? This manipulation is far beyond what we see on our daily lives. It goes beyond everything, And so, without getting too far into it, we are here physically in a physical body. We have a physical body, we have a spirit body, and we have a soul. It's a 3-body system. Okay. We ourselves are nothing but conscious energy. We don't have bodies naturally. We are put into this 3-body system, which I call a prison. So once we're in this physical system, we're very dependent. We're very dependent beings. We need food, we need water, we need clothing, we need heat, we need cooling. We need all these things, which we have no needs in our natural state. We also don't have emotions and feelings. What those are anchors that keep us here, because once you begin to attach to all these feelings and emotions and all these events and everything like that, you begin to take an ownership of them. So for instance, if somebody happens to say something that you don't like, well, you're most likely going to immediately react. Okay. And what happens when you react? You expel energy. You create energy. Every time we think, we feel, or have an emotion, that expels energy, and that energy goes somewhere. Okay. So what we're doing is every time we feel love or we feel hate or any type of feeling, especially in these NDE circumstances, man, they love that. That's the energy that they desire. And that's the whole purpose for us being here. We create energy, they absorb the energy. And that's what's happening. We're being manipulated for a very simple reason. We generate, they consume. If you want to say it, we're sheep, we're cattle. We're here to create that for them. They created this environment to manipulate us, and then have created all these stories and all these things that make us believe this is Stockholm syndrome at its finest. We are here in order for them to manipulate us in any way, shape, or form to get us to produce. I've said it many times. We're bright stars. We're forms of energy surrounded by a darkness that absorbs our light. That's the most simplistic way that I can put it. And we're put in this situation for this very reason. First, we're being manipulated and told all these different things. We're being manipulated through emotions and feelings and events that happen around us. If you could count the amount of times that you have stray thoughts during the day, or emotional attachments to something, or different feelings, it's an ongoing process. You're constantly distributing energy throughout the day on a constant basis, because most of the time people aren't in control of their thoughts, their feelings, or emotions. They're just willy-nilly going out there. And that's why we're here.
I think, and I know from previous interviews, you're not the biggest fan of particular terms of like archons or Loosh, but just so people have a little bit of a framework, if you had heard the term Loosh, I believe this is the energy frequency you're talking about us emitting. Now, I want to dive deeper. This is amazing because I had a lot of questions, and I feel like we're touching on so many of the questions that I had written down without me even prompting you, which is amazing. But I'd love to back up just a little bit, just so people can get a better understanding of where this information comes from. One of the things that I really like about you is that you encourage people to, sure, listen to you to build somewhat of a foundation, or listen to other people as well, gain that information, but ultimately you encourage people to do their own explorations and learn. And that's what you've done. You've gone out and acquired this information via firsthand experience. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey into, I believe it began with lucid dreaming and then branched into OBEs and astral projection, depending on what names people want to use?
Right. So let me start out with this. When I first started, of course, you mentioned Robert Monroe, and Robert Monroe was kind of the basis of what got me into the out of body experience. It was my interest. It was my goal. When I heard about it, I was like, that was something that I'd never heard before. So I was going to go after that. And so I was one track mind right into it. And this was back in the late 1980s. So I started a couple things, and I went ahead and decided, because I didn't like their separation processes, it didn't work for me. There's certain things you're going to try and they don't work for you, and so you just move on to the next technique. But anyways, I decided I was going to use something called lucid dreaming, and I used that as a gateway into the astral. The whole premise behind that was, okay, you ask yourself many times during the day if you're basically asleep. So what I would do is I would look at a solid object like a chair. I'd look at it, I'd turn away, ask myself if I was dreaming, I'd look back at it again. If that chair had not moved or changed state, then I knew I was awake. What I'm doing is I'm questioning my reality. So the whole idea was, at some point, hopefully when you're sleeping and you're in a dream, that question will come to mind, or you'll notice something or whatever. So you're asking yourself so many times during the day that it becomes a habit, and it'll spill over into the dream state. So I was lucky enough one night, it took me about 11 months, and I realized something in the dream was not right. And I told myself mentally, I want to have an out-of-body experience. And at that point, I'm pulled out of the dream and I'm in the astral. Basically, it looked just like everything here. I was on the side of my house. I saw a lot of things. I felt a lot of things. I knew I was in two spaces at one time. I was outside and then I was in bed. So I took notes of everything to try to compare what it was like in the physical life versus in the astral. So to stop right there for a minute, the first time I heard about Loosh was when Robert Monroe came out with the book. I think it's Far Journeys. And that's when I read about Loosh, and I didn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to accept it. I read it several times, and then I read it down the line several more times. And it wasn't something, there was nothing that I had that would support that. There was nothing that I had grasped or experienced that would support that. I had actually experienced things, but it wasn't until I sat down and put together and went over everything that I knew that I had the supportive evidence, but it was still, I still didn't have enough to convince myself at that point. So it took me many more decades in order to put that information together to come to that conclusion. But so I was successful in that. And then I kept trying and going through that process. And eventually that's when the portals began to appear. I was still practicing the lucid dreaming thing. And then the first time that I had a portal experience is as soon as I realized I was dreaming, I was pulled out of the dream before I could even tell myself anything. And I'm laying in my bed with my eyes closed on the side of my bed. I'm fully awake. I'm just with my eyes closed. And that's when the first portal appeared.
And Mike, can I interject real quick? What's a portal?
A portal is a window or an opening in between your location and anywhere else. So what you can see now, you can use several. They could be several. They could be just for visual only or communication, or you can travel back and forth through them. And there's a couple other things that you can use them for, but that's just not something I usually talk about as much. But what it is it what people, if they've been on the astral, they've been in the non-physical, they'll begin to understand that, and even in the astral. So when I had that astral projection experience, the first controlled one, I was outside of my house, okay, which was probably, I don't know, maybe 50 feet from where my body was at. But it looked everything the same. So after time, I realized that all the other alternate realities, all the other dimensions in the astral, everything is right here. Everything just happens in the same space. It's not like you go 50 million light years anywhere. No, it's all right here at the same time. Because when I make a lot of connections, utilizing the portals, you're seeing something that's right here. But what's happening is we've got all these frequencies. Say the frequency of physical life is 9,700. And at 9701 is the astral, and 9702 would be so it's all happening in the same space. All it does is that the portals open up a connection between two dissimilar locations, and it allows access. It's like opening a window in your room and you look out in your backyard, but you could also walk up to that window and look out and it's a different country. You just have the ability to make those connections. And that's what the portals do. Portals are utilized universally. It's utilized by, I could say, probably just about every type of being there is, or intelligence there is. This is something like we use cell phones for. They use portals.
And just a quick question. Sorry, real quick. You mentioned a lot of the deception and things that can occur in other interviews. I'm jumping a little ahead in terms of entities projecting themselves as something other than they are, just in something that you're familiar with. Have you ever worried that some of these portals that you're looking at or looking through are projections based on the Akashic records or based on something that you would want to see?
I first learned about the portals when I was first introduced to them. It wasn't me opening the portal, and I knew it. Because once I learned more about them, I learned that there's a certain type of energy, the certain type of knowledge needed in order to open these portals. And I knew I didn't have it. So these were being presented to me. And I also realized that as the portals were opened, it did utilize some energy from me. So for me experiencing it, it does require some form of energy from me. So, and I knew that over time, because the more frequently I would have these experiences, the less time and the less quality the portal connections were. So I finally figured it out. And then if I have one a week, then they're great. I mean, perfect 4K, perfect connection, lasted so long. But if I had two in a week, then it would be about 50% of the time frame, and it would be about 50% of the visual quality. So there's things that occur in there. So I was being presented with these, and I didn't know who it was. I had no concept of who this was creating it. But what I discovered is I was learning from it. I was learning from this whole experience. And eventually the portal connection stopped. And after a while, I realized, well, maybe it's because it's my turn in order to make the connections myself. And then that's when I taught myself. I learned how to do it. I knew what the feeling was when in the connection zone. So I duplicated that, and I tried a couple different techniques, and then I was successful. So this whole thing was a learning process. I was shown information and that sort of thing, but most of the time, all the information was not in our language, and I didn't understand it. But I would see things, and I could put together what was happening. I was being shown what the capabilities of portals were, what our capabilities are, and what we can see and what we can tune into, and the different aspects of what we can experience as well. And I hope I answered your question. I kind of got off on a tangent.
No, that's really great. But then just going to tack that one back on. So in those things that, whether you were opening the portals or somebody else was opening the portal for you and you were learning, was there ever moments where you were wondering, can I trust what I'm seeing in these portals, or is something being projected that is just for me to see that's coming from my subconscious or something like that? Was there any doubt in what you were seeing in the portals?
Not in the portals, okay? Not in the portals in the beginning for many decades, because I was only having the nighttime portals, the lucid dreaming connection portals. Dream state, completely different story. But all of this is connected. And then also in the glimpse state, which is another type of portal connection discovered through the daydream state, there has been manipulation. But the nighttime ones are they're kind of on a different level. And I have not received any of that. Dream state it's happened since I was a child. And once I became lucid within the dream state a lot, I began to understand more about what was going on. What was going on is, and the real thing that convinced me that about the Loosh was the dream state. Okay, so what would happen is, and this was even as recent as about, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago. I would be in a dream, and then all of a sudden there would be like a darkness coming around me. Everything started pixelating and getting dark. And I had this feeling of dread and kind of fear. And what would happen is, as soon as that would start, I would be pulled out of the dream and I would see a portal and I was experiencing it. So every time that would happen, and it was happening a lot, I was getting desensitized. So what it would wait till I got to that point where I was just beginning to get, kind of riled up, and then I would be pulled out, and then everything would just flatline. I wasn't, and so what I was learning is, hey, I can control myself. I can control my feelings and emotions. So as time went on, I didn't have to get pulled out of that dream when the darkness would start to come around me. I allowed it to come in. And then I went face to face with a couple times with this, what I would call the dark ones. And the reason why I call them the dark ones is because they're fashioned out of a darkness. That's their visual, concept. So I knew there was something behind it, but I didn't know what it was. So finally, I would go face to face with it. Absolutely zero emotional anything. Flatline. I didn't feel anything. I was just confident in myself. And I knew it was absolutely no threat. And at one point, I even felt as more of the hunter than the hunted. And at that point, I began to realize that I do have the ability to control the narrative. I have the ability to control the situation. And that's what I began doing. And then as I put together, so that was in the dream state. In the glimpse state, which is another portal connection, that's when I would meet these other beings. And one of the first things they ever said to me, of course, this is all telepathic, is, we can show you how to keep those portals open, which I knew immediately was a red flag. Something of that nature is like, first of all, I know it takes some of my energy. So what are you going to do? Drain all my energy? And why would I want to keep them open? Because at this point, the portals I'm keeping open are for communication. I'm not traveling from one side to the other. It feels like you're there, but it's a communication, and you can see. But I knew there was safety within that, because at one point I was told sometimes things will pop up, and there will be a being will say something like, yes, these are portals, but what I want you to know is what you can see on our side, we can also see on your side. So whatever, if I'm seeing 100 by 100, they're seeing the same thing. So they see me sitting in a room. So they know exactly where I'm coming from. Nothing's being hidden. It's all both sides. So I've been given information, just like very short spurts of information, and then the manipulation, like we can show you how to do this, we can show you how to do this. But you can usually tell when you're good at catching people that are trying to be salesmen or are trying to sell you on an agenda. You can always pick up on that. It's like nobody gives you anything for free. Usually they want something from you. So you get used to, it's like drug dealers. They give you the first couple of hits for free. Then when you're addicted, then it costs money. So what they're doing is they're creating customers, and that's what they do.
So let's. This is one thing that I actually want to talk about. Let me circle back to it though. I want to ask a quick question, and then let's come back to, because this is a big thing that I want to know about, is how do we sense the deception? Is it the fact that there's a quid pro quo, or is there something else you're picking up in the signature? But before we get to that, how many? I know this has been around 32-year journey, so you've obviously had lots of experience. Just to let the audience know, in that time, how many out of bodies or astral projections have you had throughout the course of this period?
Not many astral projections, not many out of bodies, because I utilize portals. Okay. I utilize portals and the dream state and the daydream state, which I call the glimpse state. Those are the states that I utilize. What happens is, at first, after I was successful with the astral, then I realized as a kid, I was having all these astral projections, but they were uncontrolled. So I didn't know what they were. And this was back in the 70s. Nobody knew what they were. So I knew that I was having those. As soon as I had my first one, I'm like, this is what I was having as a kid. That makes sense. Okay. So after that first controlled astral projection, I was rerouted into the portals. Every time I would try to go astral, I would end up in a portal. What I was doing is I was being redirected. And I know why now, because I know through the dream state and the other states, I know the astral is very manipulative. And I'm glad I was redirected, because at that point, then I can discover the different dimensions and the alternate realities, and I could control it. Instead of having to wait till I had a lucid dream at night, I could do this during the day in the daydream state and maybe do 10 in an hour. So what I was looking for is, I don't want to have to wait till I go to bed and then being unsuccessful and then have to try the next night and the next night. And, I want to be able to do it. So I discovered a way in order to utilize the daydream state. And so astral projections, no. Portal experiences or glimpse states or whatever, hundreds.
Okay, that's really good to know. So guys, listen up. This is from a plethora of experience having these types of experiences. Now, another follow-up I have on portals versus astral projections. You mentioned all the deception. I'm going to have Tina and Karen, who basically do quantum healing. They're going to be coming on the show at some point in the next week or two. They've also told me that they believe astral projection is potentially dangerous because of the manipulation that can happen out there, but also things that might attach to your body while you're having these OBEs or astral projections. Do you also feel that using portals is safer than having OBEs?
Well, let me give you some background on it. Okay, first thing is, when you're astral projecting, what you're doing is you're moving your conscious energy from your physical body through the cord into your spirit body. Okay, you're still residing within a body, and since you're conscious or lucid, then you could move that spirit body around. Well, while you're moving that around, your physical body is inactive because there's nothing there to motivate it. There's nothing there to drive it. And then when you come back, your conscious energy goes back and returns to the physical and makes the physical awake, alive, lucid. What's happening is anytime that you reside in a body, you still have feelings, you still have emotions, you still have physical attachments because you're still physically attached to that body. The three body system, the physical, the spirit, and the soul are all connected, and they're all part of the human trap. So anytime you reside in those, manipulation comes much easier because you still have those feelings and all this other type of stuff. When I have these portal connections, I'm not projecting. I'm making a connection, a non-physical connection, but I'm not using my body. I'm not using another body. What I'm doing is I'm utilizing my consciousness to a portal connection. And what that does is that disconnects me from the body contact. So I don't carry a lot of the emotions and the physical anything, or the feelings. I don't have that. I have the experience without all that. I would say it's more towards our normal conscious self without a body. So I don't have to rely on a body to make any changes or to move to another body. That to me is still remaining with it fully within the prison, which is more under control than it would be if you use a portal connection.
I understand. That's really interesting. Okay, so that's something I think I missed in that exact mechanism when listening to your other interviews. So, and I want to talk more about using portals, or maybe how to teach people to use portals as opposed to these other methodologies. But first, going back to using your so I understand you're going through portals. You're not burdened in a way by the body. You're not hunkered down by some of the deficiencies of the body, emotional attachments, things like that. So can you now tell us, when you're using these portals, how you're able to decipher or discern between truth and deception?
Well, first of all, there's no gauge when you're doing this. Okay, so what's happening is, and the easiest way that I can explain this is, okay, do you know how sometimes you could be just kind of sitting there thinking, and then you drift into the daydream state, like it just happens so quickly. There's like no switch. It just happens.
Yes.
This is how quickly we actually utilize the portals. So the only reason I knew about this daydream state is when I was driving these long commutes back and forth to work and back every day. I would sit in traffic for a long period of time. And so your mind just wanders, you just go off in a daydream. But then I realized there was something behind the daydream that was going on that I had a memory of it occurring, but I don't know what it was about. So I had to keep having these over and over until finally I said, I got to figure this out. So I can't do this while I'm driving because obviously it's not safe. So I began sitting in a room and staring at a wall and trying to utilize a daydream, like kind of start a daydream. You can do it two different ways. You could begin a daydream. And then at some point, if you're sitting, your eyes will close. And that state you're entering is basically what I would call the hypnagogic state. It's the closest state that I could find because you lose consciousness like this. I mean, for an instant. But if you're driving, a lot of times what'll happen is you would call your subconscious kind of takes over, and your autonomous, whatever. But so what's happening is, I'll have to go back to when I was questioning my reality. What was happening, I was questioning my reality so much that when I had a change of state, my mind would wake back up into lucidity. So what was happening as I discovered this daydream state, my mind would wake up as this daydream was still going on. I realized, okay, here's the daydream on the movie screen. There's the daydream. But there was something going on behind this movie screen. And I wanted to find out what it was. Well, it was subconscious, makes connections behind that movie screen. So your consciousness is too busy watching the movie and being in the dream, and your subconsciousness is making connections in different realities, alternate realities, and different dimensions. So I followed it back over there, and I did it so many times, because what happens is, if you have that experience over there, you're able to experience it. When you come back and you break through the veil, which separates the non-physical from the physical, It's like taking a hard drive through a magnetic field. It takes all the data out. You know there was something happening, but you don't know what it was. So I did it so many times that I could actually bring back that information. I realized, hey, behind that daydream state, behind that movie screen, there's something going on. And what's happening is we're visiting alternate realities, alternate selves, alternate lives, and also different dimensions. We're making that connection, but it's happening all the time. Every time you could maybe miss, like your thoughts move over, or you have a different thought, it's happening in that moment. And in that moment, you could think, well, that's only like, a half a second. But in that time, because there's no time, it could be 10 minutes. Or an hour. Because what we don't realize is once you begin to go outside of the physical, you realize time doesn't exist. It only exists here for our measurement. But when you go over there, there's absolutely nothing there's no past, there's no present, it's just only now. There's no future, because future is a projection, past is memory. So when you're there, everything is just happening at that point, that moment. There is no measurement of anything. There's no measurement of space, and there's no measurement of time, because it doesn't exist. So what we're doing is we're going back there, and I was having these experiences. When I came back, I was completely, I don't know. I said, I put in all this work, and I'm just not impressed. I am not impressed. I'm like, I go over there, I'm sitting there at a table with this guy in this village, and he's telling me this information. And when I was coming back, I was thinking, oh man, this is like groundbreaking. But when I figured it out, it was just general information, like somebody I was talking to in the physical. There was nothing groundbreaking. I thought, wow, I feel like I wasted my time. I really felt like that. So I started having more experiences. But once they realized that I wasn't this guy just showing up and not remembering, once they realized, oh, here's the guy who's going to remember, so we can take advantage of this. It begins by trying to befriend you, telling you that, hey, we can offer you this, and we can do this, and we can do this. And you can usually, once I've been around the block a couple of times, I tell people, if you were in New York City and you met somebody on the street, are you going to believe everything they say or trust them? No. It's the same thing there, because they're very trusting. They're very giving. They're very welcoming, And I know that there's, every being everywhere has their own agenda, and you're never going to know what it is. That's the thing. So they started offering me things, and I'd say, no, I'm good. Don't worry about it. Like if you went to the pyramids for the first time, hey, I will show you the best, tour. I will do the best thing. I will give you, no, I'm good. I want to check it out for myself. After you're there and they realize there's nothing they can gain from you, all of a sudden you don't see them anymore. You're alone. You're all by yourself. The welcome committee is gone. So I'm like, okay, now I have the freedom to go and check shit out without having to worry about them bothering me, because they're not going to give me any. I go, where's free energy? Or I'd ask them some question like that, and they don't want to do anything, So I realized, I go, this right here is a non-physical place, a non-physical space. And to me, unless I create something that I want, because they're going to create the illusion of whatever you think you want to see, and they're going to create their own image in that way too.
So Mike, real quick, just so I can make sure I'm following the whole trajectory. So you mentioned going past the veil. That's this area where there's a memory wiper, a magnetic field that's wiping your memory. You started realizing how to beat the veil, basically, so that you could retain your memories. Then they started trying to offering you things because they knew you could carry that information back. Once you rejected that, they stopped coming around you. And you're saying that's the point where you realize, okay, now I can see the truth.
That's not the point where I realized. I just knew there was a level of, like they're out for themselves. Okay. Sure. That was, obvious. Mm-hmm. I wanted to check things out for myself. And if somebody would have came and say, hey, I can always you can get a feel for how things are going, and I'll either accept it or reject it. But I figure if they're offering me these things and then I'm just saying, oh, I'm good, and I move on, and then all of a sudden they disappeared, then I know they wanted something from me. And that after they told me, hey, we can show you how to leave the portals open, I knew that wasn't something I was going to do. But this is only a small percentage of my what I would show up somewhere and I would see beings or what I would consider people. It would be either alternate realities where I was living the life of somebody else in a family or something, you know, and I would have to figure out what's going on, or I would show up and I'm kind of maybe in a town. I know it was a town that was probably built, you know, like the illusion was made to make me feel welcomed or something of that nature. And then the people, or what I would say the people, the look people would be there for me to, you know, trust. But I don't buy into a lot of that stuff because I've been doing it for a long time. So for me, I'm not just this trusting fool. You know, I'm here to check things out. So I would show up and I would be in different spaces, or I'd be in different places, or I would be actually what looked like here at the same time. And I would look through the eyes of other people through the portal connection. So I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know where I would end up. I was in these situations. So what I did was, after 36 years, well, at the time, about 32 years, I decided to go through all my notes, all my documentation, and see, you know, what I wanted to put together. And it took me about 6 months of questioning everything to the point of delusion almost. And then I put everything together and said, yes, this is what I always knew, but I didn't want to accept, because the dream state, all the portal connection experiences, I do know there's intelligent life out there. I'm not saying all of it's bad. And I wouldn't consider, when people say bad or good, okay, is it bad, or is a wolf bad or good for attacking a rabbit for its food? Okay, that's predator and prey. I do believe there are a lot of predators out there that want to prey on whatever they can get to make their life or their existence better. And I just don't know what their situation is, so I'm not going to judge them. And I never make judgments when I'm in those situations. I come back, I make my documentation. At that point, after that, down the line, I can make a judgment based upon my experiences in a whole. But I don't make judgments when I'm there, other than the fact that if somebody tells me, well, I want to show you how to keep the portals open, then I'll just say no, because I know that's a red flag immediately.
So have you met entities that you are quite convinced that in the mix of all the entities that you're quite convinced that they were, quote unquote, let's say they didn't have a selfish motive, that they were actually just trying to be altruistic and help you, and you could trust them?
Yeah, there was a few. They show up. Usually it shows up as a robed individual with the face covered, will be the face. And they'll pop in and they'll just, sometimes they'll say something. Other times they'll just be there. I can't see who or what they are, but I know it's, you can kind of get the vibe that if something's trusting or whatever, they're just hanging out to let you know they're there, because they don't have to show themselves. And other ones, most of the ones that show up that are there with some kind of a message are usually there to manipulate. And I can usually tell that, because they're, you know, first of all, if they want either give you something and you know there's a return somewhere, or they want something from you. So what I normally do is I just go there, and at this point, I don't have anything that that approaches me. Ever since before I started practicing the solution, after my last confrontation with the dark ones, yeah, things will not approach me because practicing the solution is going to stop that. So I don't run into anything unless they're a much higher level type of a being.
And we're going to get to the solution because this is huge. Obviously, a big part of this is not only exploring and understanding what exactly we are in, but potentially what are some ways to get out if that's what we choose to do. So that is the solution that we're going to get to in a moment. I want to go back to the robed or hooded figures because that's actually interesting that you describe those as the good or potentially benevolent or altruistic entities, because I've heard of these entities appearing in NDEs as part of the councils that are judging souls. So that seems like there's a nefarious intent there. I've also heard of them described by David Icke as those who are effectively archons or acting on the behalf of archons. And we don't have to use these terms too heavily here, but you get what I'm saying. Basically, people that are administrators of the system, if you will, of this entire Loosh harvesting system.
I didn't get any vibe from the robed individuals like I did from the dark ones or some of the other ones.
Okay.
It's not like you get this trusting, but you can usually get it. What happens is when you're in a portal connection, there's always energy that is coming back and forth that allows the other side or the others information about you that you can't control that, and you get information about them. It's not that I'm like, I know who they are, but you kind of get a feeling of, not even a feeling, but you get an energy signature that doesn't give you any type of a fear base or anything of that nature. I mean, whether or not I'm not going to emotionally or create something, but what I can usually tell that there was anything. It was kind of just like, yeah, nothing,
And
so
is this, sorry to interrupt real quick, but is this a skill that you had to cultivate to be able to decipher the energy signal? Or is it something you've always had that you feel confident you've always been able to say, okay, I can feel the authentic energy signature?
Once I started having the portals and stuff, when I wasn't having them, I started getting these almost feelings like I took some Kundalini classes decades ago. And I know what that feels like, the energy rising. So I would get that happening to me when I just like awake, maybe driving or something like that. And what that allowed me to do is to realize that, okay, yeah, I could stop it, or I could, create that flow. So at some point I started to, make it happen and stop it. And then when I was experiencing the dark ones, I felt it rising, like it was rising to come out, because they were like almost like pulling it out, and I stop it. I said, no, you're not going to get this energy. I feel it flowing. I'm stopping it. So once I started controlling it, then I realized it had to do with my emotions and my feelings and thoughts. All those could trigger that energy flow. And if you're aware of it, then you can stop it, or you can initiate it and utilize it for your own, benefit. And then with the solution, I know I've made a good connection if I can feel that flow of energy incoming. So it's just something you kind of learn as you go through the process. There are things that you pick up that you just kind of, like, okay, well, let me try that. For me, I'm just going to try it. If I experience something, I'm like, oh, how do I duplicate that? How do I try that? Let me do it.
So is there now you mentioned in another interview that I've listened to that we are the heroes that we've been waiting for. So I guess my follow-up question is, let's say you're trying to discern if an entity has a good signature or not. You feel like you're able to, but ultimately, do we even need to ever try to trust an entity, or can we just look within and trust ourselves? And is that enough?
Well, I don't go through the process of trying to discern whether one's good or not. If I see one, then that's it. And I understand, like, if you were to be, if you were a rabbit and you're walking around, and you're always on the lookout for a wolf or a coyote, and you happen to see one, you're not going to hang around. So, that's just the way things work. So when you're out basically hunting, they're not going to be around if they know what you do, and they all know what you do. So there's a reason why I don't see much of them, because that's what I spend my time doing. If you're going to be here, then that's what happens, no different than, then like I said, predator and prey scenario, I'm not going to be the prey anymore. And I've decided that, so I've gone on the hunt, and that's what I do.
Now, you mentioned as well in another interview talking about the predator-prey dynamic, but which may sound a little scary, but I think you mentioned in another interview, we don't really have anything to fear, because we are so powerful, and ultimately we just have to recognize how powerful we are. Can you talk a little bit about why we actually don't need to be fearful?
Well, that's a learned process, and even with a lot of the people that I speak with that are practicing what's going on, as I got through the process, because like I said, when I first got into the spirituality, whatever, the metaphysical, I bought into a lot of the beliefs.
Do we need to even look to other entities or trust other entities, or ultimately can we
trust yourself?
Yeah, trust ourselves.
Yeah. Okay. Always trust yourself. And also it comes down to you having the faith in yourself. See, what we're doing is we're so programmed to put our faith in a God or somebody else or something else, because that's the way we've been taught. But once you begin to experience in the non-physical, you realize that, hey, you know what? I really don't have any limitations. And so as you go along and do something, you realize that I'm self-sufficient. I don't need to be dependent. I am independent, because you're trying to break that shell. What you need to do is get out of that box that you've been living in, the box of comfort and complacency. And once you begin to push out that box and those limitations, you begin to see what's around you. It's limitless. But what a lot of these beings are trying to do is keep you within that limited box, because if they give you information to expand that box, then you're going to become what you really are. And that's what I'm saying to people is, have your own experiences, but question everything. Don't believe it just because you experienced it. Don't believe everything. Have experiences and experiences and experience. And as you go, you'll expand yourself. You'll expand your knowledge. You'll expand your abilities. And as you expand, you won't even notice some of the things. And you'll realize, hey, if something comes to thought, I can do that. There's no limitations in the non-physical. We're used to the limitations. We're taught our limitations. But when you get there and you really start to work within it, there isn't any. And you begin to believe in yourself. Once you can believe in yourself, then you're no longer prey. You are no longer prey, because you know now that anything that comes your way, you can take care of it.
For these limitations, let's talk about the soul body, the spirit body, the physical body that we are placed in. How did we get placed in these bodies in your estimation?
I really can't answer it, but at some point, obviously, what I would call technology is far beyond what we could even think about. What I call the subconscious is the enemy within. It kind of oversees everything from the non-physical. It's connected to each one of us, and it's manipulative. It's part of the machine, the prison that keeps us within it. The prison, the 3-body system prison, the physical prison, all this whole conglomeration of control. And it's so intelligent. What I've learned now, being around these dark beings, it has negative effects, but it also has positive effects. The negative effects is sometimes you begin to think on the way that that they think, the predator and prey, not caring or anything of that nature. But then again, by learning how they think, I knew what they were thinking. So at that point, I could grasp that and use that to my advantage and write down what I was thinking, how I thought about things, human cattle and that sort of thing, and the manipulation. Because say we lived on milk and we needed the cows to produce more milk because we had more people. So we'd find different ways to manipulate the cows, whether it's through chemicals or whatever. We would do that to keep the cows, producing milk.
Yep.
And that's where we're at. So no matter what they need to do, there are no rules. There are no limitations to what they'll do to us or have done to us in order for us to produce. So that's the situation that we're in. It's not about, I don't even say good or bad anymore. It has to do with predator and prey and what the predator will do in order to get the prey to produce.
I totally agree with what you're saying. Now, just going back to, I know you mentioned it's a technology or some high level of technology that is utilized to get us into this spirit body, physical body, etc. But my big question is, do they need our consent? Because I believe they do. That's my understanding, that free will cannot be bypassed. So they need us to agree to come back. Do you believe that as well?
Not really. What I think is, now I've spent a lot of time working in the dream state, the lucid dreaming, and all these kind of things. And sometimes the harder you work, the more resistance that you experience. So no matter what, you're going to experience more resistance the harder you push back. Okay. And when we say, oh yeah, well, in the end, the spirit world's going to save us, or God's going to save us, or anything in that nature, what I've come to the conclusion of is there's a hierarchy much above what we're seeing. And the hierarchy doesn't care. The hierarchy is, we're not involved. It's like government. The higher you go up in government, they don't really care about the people. They just care about their own well-being, their own existence. No matter how much you might know or how well trained you are, it still comes down to, the self, or thinking about the self. We're on the bottom rung of the ladder. Nobody wants to come down to this level. Nobody cares about this level. So we're on our own. We are basically on our own. And free will, I think, was just a word that was just thrown at us. It was just thrown at us and said, oh yeah, you got this, you got this. I don't think we need to necessarily agree to anything. And if we did, once you get in that state, they could easily manipulate you into like a drug-like state, like in the dream where you're not sure what's going on and you'll agree to anything. So if that was the case, okay. But I don't see us having to agree. I'm just thinking, you know what? Even if we did have to agree, we're being manipulated. So you're not gonna get out of it. So I figured the only way we're going to be able to get out of this thing is to take it down ourselves.
Okay,
it's not about wait until we die.
Okay, let's talk about that. So this goes into your solution and your thought process of basically taking back control, which I thought was really interesting because it does sound unique to what I've heard thus far. And I think it has to do with almost like reversing the flow of energy. They're obviously taking the energy from us, and you propose something along the lines of reversing that flow. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I knew that whatever we do in the physical world, because it's so, the manipulation is such a stronghold. You've got governments, you've got big corporations, you got the big money. We do all the jobs as, normal citizens, and the normal citizens are great at what we do. But when you're up against losing everything and your family and protecting your family, people aren't going to want to stand up as much because they don't want to lose everything. And I understand that. So we're in a situation where, hey, going in the physical, and you're having all these wars and stuff and destroying all of these cities and our infrastructure, that's ridiculous. So I said, there's got to be another way. Obviously it comes down from the non-physical. You have all these rituals and they're another thing is the children. That's a whole nother subject. 460,000 children missing in the United States every year. That goes worldwide. And they're utilizing children for a lot of these sacrifices and all these things. This just goes beyond this. But anyways, it all filters down from them, looking at these dark entities as gods. That's where their instructions come from. So what I said is, and it came to me one day, instead of giving them energy, why don't you take the energy back? It's the most simplistic term to do it, and I thought it was just too simple. But since I'd already understood how the energy kind of works, I said, let me give it a try. Let me see. And as I began that, then I became the most unpopular person around, because that's when I noticed there was nothing, but I can get to what I need to at the time. So I started taking back the energy, and I realized I could do it in different ways through different like channels, like the glimpse state and through lucid dreaming, and I could do it through the dream state. So I tried them all. I used them all, and I was successful in that. And I thought, you know what? If we pull the system down, if we weaken the system and break down the level of control, then we can become more in control of what's going on. Because at this point, you know, they're going to look for these entities, you know, during their seances or their rituals. What happens if we show up, or if we are there, or if we're going to be taking back that energy? They're not going to get anything, because they're looking for them for the power, and we are going to be taking it back. And that's the whole purpose behind it. Let's cut the head off the snake. Don't worry about, you know, fighting the whole nest of snakes. Let's go to the king snake and cut his head off.
Are we more, it's really interesting, because I hadn't heard something like this before. And you're not saying to wait until you pass on, or no, you're saying do it right now through these experiences, start reversing that flow of energy, which I thought was really, I mean, it makes sense logically, and I hadn't heard it before. But in your estimation, then this leads to the next question. Are we more powerful, each of us individually, than these dark entities? Some might call them archons.
When I first started, it was on a very small scale, because you learn as you go. And what I quickly discovered in the first couple of months is this is a training process. What we're doing is we're going through this, and we're learning about ourselves. We're learning about our capabilities. We're learning about our unlimited capabilities. I was learning things. I'm like, wow, I would have never thought that. Just by having these, I don't know, portal experiences, I was learning things. But this gets me involved. This makes me do something. And now I'm like, how else can I extract this? Or how else can I find them? Or how else can I move? You know, and I'm like, well, I had all these questions, and I'm like, well, I'm the only one that's going to answer it. So let me try this. Let me try this. Let me try this. And the next thing I know, I mean, I might spend 6 hours doing it. I might spend most of the night. And what happens is, as I begin this process, it takes on a life of its own. It's like I go, it happens, it occurs. You know, it's like I set up a chain reaction, and everything just starts to fall into line, and it just opens up. And all of a sudden, now there's this non-physical reality that just opens up. We have the ability to create far beyond what we could believe. And so what's happening is these other entities are very limited. I don't believe, you know, this said the archons don't have an imagination, they can only duplicate. Well, at some point I believe that, because we have the ability to just imagine things. And with that imagination, we have the ability to create. And they don't have that. And there's things that I do that I'm like, okay, I didn't know I had this ability to do this. So I'm going to push ahead. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to keep doing it. So it's a learning process, taking back the energy. And what we're doing is we're realizing that because we are conscious energy, that non-physical is our natural, that's our natural place. That's our natural home. So when we get in there, what we do is we become what we really are, and we begin expanding. And then our confidence level goes up, and we begin to see the game for what it is, the game of life. And then we don't buy into the crap, and then we don't put up with the crap. No longer are we going to buy into this stuff. And that's what it's all about. you gaining that confidence and reassurance of what you really are capable of.
If we, in your estimation, you may not know the answer to this, but if we stop feeding the system and the dark entities or archons with Loosh, do they cease to exist?
Well, we can put it in this light. If we had a bunch of cattle, you know, we said we lived in, you know, one world, and all we had was these cattle, and all of a sudden, suddenly the cattle just stopped producing. We couldn't get them to produce. What are we going to do? You got to find something else, or you got to go somewhere else. So, okay, first of all, I don't just want to, I know that the reality of the situation is we have 8 billion people on the planet. We're not going to get 8 billion people to stop doing it. We probably won't even get 1 billion people to stop doing it. I mean, 100,000 would be a push. Okay. So not just stopping it, it's about attacking their system and taking it down. You know, because if you think about it, everybody on this earth, you know, all the people, the regular people, they do every job. There's hackers, there's, you know, thieves, there's this, there's that. And everybody's got an imagination, and everybody's really good at something. So if we get enough of those people that don't limit their thinking or don't limit what they're capable of, and they jump on board, these are the same people that make life happen every day in our existence. You know, so if we jump on board, we can figure any issue out. That's the thing. I don't think it takes that many, but I don't know. I can't answer that. That's not an answer that I can give. But with people working on it, and what the good part about this is if you have an association, the first thing they're going to do is infiltrate your association. They're going to splinter it, and then everybody's going to go off on their own way, so nobody's going to follow it. The good thing about this is the solution is you practice it on your own. You set your own roles. You set your own guidance. You set what you're going. You decide what you're going to do. If you've got a bunch of people all working separately on the same, you know, for the same goal, you can't splinter the group. Have
you heard of Alabar Jones?
I've heard of him.
Do you think that his efforts in terms of these basically sounds similar to what you're proposing, that these types of joint efforts that he's basically trying to organize in terms of attacking the system are on the right path?
I haven't listened to anything of his. I've heard his name. I don't know anything beyond that, so I couldn't answer that. Everybody, I'm sure a lot of people have their own ideas on it. All I can say is, if they're working towards a goal of taking down the system, then I would promote anything of that nature. I don't know enough about it, but you know, that's what we're all doing. I mean, there's not as many of us that I'm sure there would be a lot more if people knew about it. But the whole thing is kind of like I said, getting a group together is almost impossible anyways. But the last thing you want to do is have somebody infiltrate that group. But if we're all working alone, as a lone wolf, we'll call it, or a hunter, then, you know, because we don't have to get together to work together. We work on our own. And so everybody's got their own way of doing things and their own mind, and they're working at their own level, at their own pace. That's what this is all about. You know, as you begin to realize your potential, then it expands and expands and expands.
Where do we go if we are able to escape the matrix? Where do we go? And or maybe the better question is, what does existence look like once we actually get outside of the system?
Well, we're all creators. I mean, we've all we can remember is the physical world. You know, that's all we can remember. But when you go in the non-physical, and I ask myself, well, it was just, you know, kind of dark or whatever. It's dark until you create something. You know, I mean, once you create something, see, I think we're in a fishbowl. No matter how far I go out in these other dimensions and other alternate realities, and I know they're limitless. So there could be trillions of alternate realities. There could be trillions of different dimensions. I know there's, you know, I'm sure it just goes on forever. But to tell ourselves that, you know, where are we going to go? We're going to be here. I mean, not in the physical, but here is there. Here is everywhere. So for us, if you decided you wanted to live in something like a physical world, you would create it. Because once you realize that whatever you desire would be it, that's what you create. Mm-hmm. And we are limited within our situation now. So outside of that situation is limitless.
That's similar to how Jason Giorgiani describes our ultimate place that we want to go is essentially a choose your own adventure. What we think or what we imagine, we manifest, and that makes a lot of sense. I wanted to ask your opinion on something that I covered a few days ago on the channel, which was a pretty harrowing vision. It was a gentleman who had an NDE, and obviously we know that NDEs are full of a deception based on whatever's in our mind or our Akashic records or whatnot. But he had an NDE from a Christian background, had an NDE where he basically saw the equivalent of a hell that is described in Dante's Inferno, where there's all sorts of torturing based on particular sins and all this stuff like that. And what I wanted to ask is, you mentioned that these entities, these dark forces, can project it into whatever form they want. So they can project into an angel if that would be appeasing to us, Jesus, these different entities, right? Do you think that it's also possible for them to project an overlay of a realm that might match where we think we are going? Like if he thought he was going to a quote unquote hellish realm, that was all projected and placed in front of him based on his Akashic records and expectations.
Yeah, completely. Because the same thing as if an alien came to Earth and he shows up on a Hollywood set and, you know, these big mansion and all these cars and all this kind of stuff. And he's going to go back and say, hey, all these people are rich. They got all these great cars, big houses. Everybody's got the same, you know, and believe that because that's the production that they have exposed them to. It's the same thing. When I go to these places, I know there's not a little town, and I know these beings don't look like the people that are speaking. It's just a facade. It's for your what you would accept. It's for your acceptance. You know, if it was they could be your grandma, they could be your dad, they could be Jesus, it could be the devil, it could be anything. And then they create the landscape and they create their own image based upon what people would call their Akashic records. They know everything about you. Mm-hmm. So they are going to play to you what your wants and needs and feelings and emotions are going to, you know, that they tug at your heartstrings.
Now, it's effectively what you're talking about is they're trying to get your compliance in whatever way possible, whether it's through fear, whether it's through love bombing. And so that ultimately is the objective of these projections or whatever it may be. Now, as we start to get to the end of the interview, you mentioned this idea of the solution, and you also talked about your journey of how you were able to practice and cultivate this ability to take your energy back. And I love this idea because it goes back to the idea of sovereignty, literally taking your energy back, taking your fate back into your own hands. How can people that are listening to this today, how can they begin that journey?
I came out with a video on my channel called The Solution. And then a couple months later, The Plan, which they work together. What I do is there's many ways that you can access the non-physical, whether it's through relaxation techniques or through meditation. You can use the glimpse state, because everybody has a different way that you can either relax or get into another state. I tell them to use whatever works for you and practice all of them. Maybe get good at all of them, and then utilize different states to do that. You might be able to just sit in a chair and switch right over to another state. A lot of people can. It's like no different from being in the car and then just switching over, you know, like, okay, I'm conscious. Now I'm unconscious, you know, like I just drove the last 50 miles and I don't remember anything, you know, the last gas station, that was 50 miles ago. So that's what you find out what works best for you, and then work on them all. Just try them all. You know, it's good to be good at everything. And then, so what you're doing is you're getting yourself in that state. Well, what do I do if I don't see anything? I'm not going to experience anything. Well, find out for you what you would believe based upon your experiences. What have you seen in your dreams that you would say that you fear, or something that you fear naturally? And what you would do is you would put that into your production, into your non-physical production, into that space, add that to your space, and then go after it. Take the energy from that. What you're doing is you're connecting with what's happened to you in the past, that non-physical being, and you're placing it in that space, which means it's part of that space. And you're going to take back the energy from that, whether you put 5 there or 1 or 50 or 100 or fill the room full of, or whatever you do, and take back from all of them. Because what you're doing is, a lot of people don't realize this either. So there's some things in the physical that we don't normally are told about. So they did an experiment many years ago, where they took some skin cells from somebody, and then they had them in 2 different places on Earth. They did something. They applied something to the skin cells on one side, and at the same time, there was a change in the skin cells. So they were alive. So what's happening is, if you apply some frequency to those skin cells, it affects them everywhere. So it affects the person. And that's how they do what they would call frequency. It's called the Rife. They treated people using frequency. It was a Rife machine. Raymond Rife is the one who started that. But they realized that if you subject it's no matter where you're at, it could be in another universe, and it still affects them. So what's happening is, if you project that, what you've seen, what you've experienced, you are therefore affecting it, because you are duplicating it there, and you are affecting it by having it there, because the non-physical space is completely different, but it does have some similarities, and you can affect things like that. So if you were afraid of something, you can project it and physically and not non-physically manipulate it at that point. So you begin by that, and then go through the videos, and then what you're doing is you're finding different ways that you can do something. And as you do that, you're growing. You're realizing, oh, I could do this. Or what if I do this? Or what if I start like this? Or what if, and then it begins to branch off. Like, as soon as you learn something, then you can branch off and just create all these different things. Well, I could use it for this. Well, I could do this with it. Well, I could do that. And so what you're doing is, it's a training to train yourself. You decide how much effort you're going to put into it. And if you put a little bit of effort, you're not going to get much results. That's the way everything works. But that's what it's all about. It's about you training yourself. And at the same time, you're taking back energy. So it's a multi-mode of training.
All right. Amazing. There it is. And I gotta put links to both of those in the description so people can check out these videos. Mike, this was a incredible conversation. Unbelievable. Like I thought it would be. We did have some interference. I don't know if you noticed it, but it was on my end. I'm noticing that occasionally in interviews. I don't know why. I don't know what. I am in Costa Rica right now, but my internet connection has been great. And then now it's been a little glitchy, but I think I was able to catch everything. So just a little bit of interruption, but I think the message is still going to come out loud and clear. This was incredible. So thank you so much for taking the time to have this great conversation with me. If people want to learn more about you and your work, how can they do that?
My Dark Explorations on YouTube, and then I have books on Amazon, My Dark Explorations, Portals, and then also The Spiritualist Manifesto, A Guide to Freedom, and then Leaving the Illusion of Life is the 3rd book on Amazon.
There we have it, ladies and gentlemen, an entire framework of what the system is, a solution, basically a beautiful framework by which to take your power back. I just really like the visual that presents when we think about it, just the word, the way you say it, the solution, taking your power back, just like we should, embracing our sovereignty. Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments. Thank you guys so much for joining, and we'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.